Hey everybody, thanks as always for stopping by. So today I wanted to talk about this book right here. I borrowed it from a reading room and I had to return it, so I don't have a physical copy of it, but let's get right into it. All right, everybody, so today we're talking about Conversations with Myself by Nelson Mandela, one of, you could say, the world's modern heroes, real Gandhian type figure. I really like this book for a few reasons. See, it's an authorized biography of him, right? So he didn't write it. It's not an autobiography, but it's like 99.9% of it are his writings. So you definitely get access to the inner life of this man. It's made up of his diary entries and epistolary, letters he's written to many people over the course of his life. And, you get these sort of Marcus Aurelius type stoical ideas and insights, sort of how he viewed the world philosophically, how he viewed the fight for freedom of South Africa, his insights on imperialism and neocolonialism, and just justice overall. I really enjoyed this book because it's so relevant, I think, to this Palestinian moment. I've talked a lot about the Palestinians, especially since October 7th. It's been a real theme on this channel because most of my reading leans towards that sort of thing, right? As marginalized groups fighting for recognition in a world that will not grant it to them. So Nelson Mandela figures very prominently in that struggle. And I've even talked in the past about how he's helped at the UN, this sort of international understanding of terrorism, because, his ilk was at one time cast as terrorists. I mean, they were like Hamas, they were viewed like Hezbollah and Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And while some of those are fair comparisons, at least in terms of self-defense, for the most part, that's a wrong way of looking at it. It's far better conceptualized, and this is how the UN has really begun to look at some of these situations, certainly in the case of Palestinian resistance, as guerrilla warfare, more of the Che Guevara type resistance, stripped of its Soviet communist sympathies, if you will. There's so many things that I'm just, my head is popping with all these things I want to say about it. But Nora Aircat, who wrote Justice for Some, I commented on this. You'll see it in my list of content there. I'd highly recommend you watch it, which sort of talks about how we, at the international level, view resistance fighters. And Nelson Mandela, he's really been, I would say, consecrated as like this saintly type figure. And most of that is quite well deserved, in my opinion. Not all of it, of course. I don't like it when people are beatified, but I really do think this man was an exceptional person, especially in terms of how he helped the world define the resistance to imperial powers and racist, white supremacy and things like that. While him and Gandhi would not be too far apart in their idea of the role of violence in these situations, Gandhi has been more branded as almost Jainist in his nonviolence. Like don't hurt a fly, and eventually these bad actors will just implode from their own stupidity and their own barbaric tendencies. But when you really have an insight on Gandhi and his ruling philosophy, even though he's been cast as this guy that's, all about nonviolence, almost to the Jainist end of things, it's not really a proper representation of what that guy was all about. That could warrant a video in itself and a whole discussion in itself. I'm not going to do that today. But Nelson Mandela was sort of cast as a Gandhian type figure, but he really helped the world to conceptualize that violence can't be avoided sometimes. And especially in cases of like what happened in South Africa, it was perfectly warranted. And yes, you can take issue with how certain fighters, like for example, if you're talking in the context of Hamas, I can simultaneously legitimate their self-defense on behalf of Palestinians. But I mean, outside of that, their methods for conducting that self-defense, and certainly their views towards governance, that's where I have to, take a vast departure from their ideology. But as far as Hamas goes in terms of defending Palestinian sovereignty and civil rights, they are at least justified in that respect. Can you defend their methods? Well, of course not. But if you're going to justify Israel's idea of self-defense, which the UN doesn't recognize, by the way, the UN does not recognize that Israel has a right to defend itself against Palestinian resistance in this context. It doesn't have a right to self-defense. But we know that there are many people who do, and they're willing to gulp down all of the war crimes. They're willing to justify all of the burnt hospitals, all of the methods that Israel uses. So if we're going to be consistent about this, let's use some proportionality. So anyway, Nelson Mandela, I think that's what his greatest contribution to the world has been, is legitimizing at the highest level, at the highest institutional level that exists, that there is a place for oppressed peoples to stand up for themselves and to resist the very worst of imperialist aggressions and interests. It really gives you access to the mind of this great man, his inner life. I also really respected something else about Nelson Mandela. Is you think of Nelson Mandela as this sort of Mother Teresa type figure, like very gentle. Mother Teresa was a charlatan, in my opinion. But, I'm talking about the brands of these people, right? Nelson Mandela has this, kind of Gandhian benevolence, that he exudes that energy, you know what I mean? But when you look into that man's sense of justice, there was kind of a monster he was holding in, I don't mean a bad monster. I mean a monster in kind of the Jordan Peterson sense, that you have to be a competent person who is willing and capable to bring about some pretty violent outcomes on behalf of your people and your interests. But that isn't the person in itself. It's kept under check, and it's very much a principled violence. It's a violence and a monstrosity that's there in extremis. That's what I really respected about Nelson Mandela. When you look at the way that he dealt with the prison guards, for example, he would tell them under no uncertain terms that they were wrong, but it was in a way that, left these people with what little dignity they could claim for themselves under such extreme circumstances. That these people didn't have access to the other side of the argument. Not really. Maybe they should have seen through the matrix a little bit. And, he wasn't willing to give them a free ride on that one or give them a pass. But at the same time was willing to understand the impossible circumstances in which this sort of thing arises, this sort of oppression and racism and white supremacy that's just sort of baked into and endemic to the situation as a whole. So that was really neat. I enjoyed that. And I also really enjoyed the foreword to this book, which was written by Barack Obama. Now, this book came out, I think it was published in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. The latter part of 2010. So I would love to hear your comments on it if you've read it or if you intend to read it. And so with that, I suppose we'll see you in the next one. Till then. Hey everyone, I hope you liked this video. If you want more like the one you just watched, click the suggested video on this screen. Make sure you subscribe, and to connect with me on my other platforms, my handles are linked below in the description, alright? Take care, peeps. Till next time.